Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle. I've got a really exciting episode today. This is my album spotlight of Big Big Train's Welcome to the Planet, their brand new album that just came out on January 28th, 2022. This is an amazing album. Let me say right off the bat that I highly recommend this to all people, to all fans of progressive rock music of all sorts. This is a fantastic album, one of the best releases, I'm sure, of the year. It's going to place highly on my eventual year-end ranking, I'm sure. I just think the band really did something amazing here, so just wanted to really make a point of that right here at the outset of this review, that this is one that is really special to me, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about how I feel about it and kind of my experience with it. So Big Big Train, of course, is a fantastic progressive rock band. They came out with Common Ground, was their previous album that came out last summer. I did a review of that one last year on the channel. It placed highly on my year-end countdown and all of that stuff. Fantastic album that I really felt kind of signaled a new start to the band. You know, they had gone down to like a four-piece. They lost several members for various reasons. They kind of had to slow things down because of the pandemic. Their tour plans were kind of upended, and so everything kind of was questionable regarding their future, but they really banded together, this kind of foursome with David Lungden, Greg Sponton, Nick DiVirgilio, and Rickard Sojablum. They kind of bonded together and formed Common Ground and really brought a freshness to it, in my opinion. There's hallmarks of the great classic Big Big Train sound, but they were kind of exploring and doing a couple different things, and it felt more collaborative. And I feel like this album kind of continues that trend. It brings on several new members to the group who I believe helped and were present on the Common Ground album and played on it, but weren't really foundational to the writing and to the development of it. And so I feel like this album is a chance for some of these new members to shine, namely Carly Bryant, who plays keyboards and does some lead vocals, Dave Foster on guitars, and then Claire Lindley on violin and vocals. So we've got three really strong new members who are contributing and doing a lot on this album. And so when this album first was announced, I kind of imagined that it was like a companion piece to Common Ground, kind of similar to what Second Brightest Star is for Folklore and Grimmspound. And I was somewhat disappointed with Second Brightest Star when it came out. It was kind of a surprise album that came out of nowhere, and I was like, oh cool, a brand new Big Big Train album. But I felt it was more of a bonus album and wasn't really a true studio album in the same sense that Folklore and Grimmspound were, because it had, it was kind of some of the leftover pieces that didn't quite fit on those albums, some additional things they were kind of experimenting with that were a little bit different, and then a couple like new extended versions of existing pieces from the Folklore album. So it felt a little disjointed to me. There were some excellent tracks, certainly, but I was kind of like, I don't know if I'd consider this really a full-length album on its own, because there's just it's so intertwined with what's on Grimmspound and Folklore that it feels more like just kind of a companion piece, a bonus disc, as it were, to those albums. So I was imagining Welcome to the Planet would be kind of a similar experience, but I don't think so at all. To me, this album totally stands up on its own, as much as it kind of works in tandem with Common Ground, because I feel like the band was in a similar place in composing those albums. This album doesn't need Common Ground to exist. This is its own entity, and it really carries a life of its own, in my opinion, which makes it stand head and shoulders to me above like something like Second Brightest Star. And in fact, this may be one of their strongest albums that they've come up with. It really is that good to me. I've been listening to the band kind of talk about the album. They have a lot of YouTube clips where they've talked through some of their process in developing the album and writing certain songs and such. And it seems like that their plan was kind of for it to be a companion album, kind of this a little bit of a bonus album to accompany Common Ground, but the pieces were so strong they decided, no, this deserves to be its own full album, and I think that was a wise choice to kind of make this its own singular album. And of course it'll always be connected to Common Ground. I mean, the album covers are very similar, and there's definitely, like I said, there's a definite shared DNA between these albums, but I just want to emphasize that this album stands on its own and is equal, if not even maybe a bit better than Common Ground. You know, it's very close between the two, in my opinion, but they each have equal value in my mind. Common Ground kind of stemmed more from this idea of taking away the differences that separate us and trying to find common ground, especially through the pandemic. I think there was a lot of emphasis on the human spirit kind of shining through in dark times of the pandemic and bringing people together. I feel like this album is more various vignettes and stories and different pieces. Each song kind of lives in its own world, in my opinion, and I think that creates for a very different experience than Common Ground, which felt more of this cohesive, almost conceptual work, where this is more just a collection of great songs, but luckily it's sequenced in such a way that it really works and holds together as an entire piece, so it's a very satisfying listen from front to back. And also I like the structure that it's a shorter album, so it fits very well on like a vinyl. There's two sides to it. There's a part 1 and a part 2, and they're very equal and equivalent and have like the same roughly amount of songs on each side. And so it's a really cool framework, and I think it really works well for this album and just makes for a very easy listen. You know, I breeze through this album really fast because it's such an enjoyable listen, and it's compact and there's no filler, and it's just every track just hits hard and is a great track. So I really appreciate that structurally with the album. So going through the songs a little bit, in part 1, we start with Made from Sunshine, which was written by new member Dave Foster and also David Lungden, kind of a co-write here. Lungden kind of focused on the lyrics from what I'm aware of. And it's a beautiful, uplifting song to start off the album. It's very positive, has a great message and spirit to it. It has some great brass sections and some pretty piano melodies. Great vocals between David Lungden and Claire Lindley is part of this. Just gives me that happy, positive feeling and starts the album on such a good note. Similar to a lot of their album openers like Alive and Folklore, Make Some Noise. These are just fun tracks that really, to me, kind of set the stage for what's to come, like get you in the mood and get you excited, and I think this track does that really well. The Connection Plan, which was written by Nick DiVirgilio, is coming up next. It's a fantastic track, one of my favorites on the album. I just love it just has such a unique quality. It's something different than what I've heard before with Big Big Train. There's some really cool interplay with violin and bass, and it kind of gives this almost, I don't know if it's an eerie vibe, but it's just really a little bit off kilter, but it's really fun to listen to. Some really cool funky drumming kind of comes into the mix from Nick DiVirgilio. Some great vocals both from David in the verses and Nick in the chorus, like a lot of layered things going on in the vocals. Super cool, almost a little touch of a Spock Spirit element that I think Nick DiVirgilio brought in, but it's super cool song that I recommend listening to. It's great. Lanterna is next from Greg Sponton. This is the one track that feels like it could also be on Common Ground. It's the kind of shared DNA to me between the albums, because it even shares some melodies from Atlantic Cable from Common Ground. But it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful song. It starts with this kind of heavenly piano and acoustic guitar over these really gorgeous harmonies. It kind of moves into a more proggy direction as it goes on. To me, it kind of captures some of the classic sounds of Big Big Train. Because I feel like that's a great balance on this album between some of their classic sound of what you're used to from like the English Electric albums and early period with David Lungden, but also infusing new kind of styles and sounds also, and kind of utilizing some of these new band members to bring a freshness to the sound. So I think this track kind of personifies that well. It has a lot of that classic Big Big Train feel, but also infuses some new elements from the different members to kind of give it a little bit of a newer flavor. Capitoline Venus, once again, feels like it could be a part of like English Electric, kind of a lost track from those days. It's just really gorgeous and beautiful. focused mostly on just this 12-string guitar from Greg Sponton and David's amazing vocals with some mellotron and piano backing. And it's a beautiful song. I believe the inspiration was Greg Sponton's wife was the inspiration. It's kind of a love song, and it's beautifully crafted and really beautiful to listen to. And then the part one kind of ends with a instrumental called "A Room with No Ceiling" from Rickard, who's of course bringing in some elements from his previous band Beardfish. So that's really cool. It has kind of a jazzy keys, and a great bass and drum groove. One of the more proggier parts of the album, really. And there's even an accordion section towards the end that adds another element that I think Rickard kind of brought to the plate as well. So really a cool piece of music that's very proggy and very fun, and kind of in a good position here after all these more vocal-centric tracks, I think. Part 2 begins with another one of my favorites from the album, Proper Jack Froster, from Greg Sponton. Another track that kind of feels like that classic Big Big Train sound. It kind of has this storytelling element about some childhood memories from Greg Sponton, and also feels like it's a bit like a Christmas song. You know, it has that wintry Christmas vibe based on the storyline. And it really is gorgeous. Once again, great keyboards, some Hammond organ and strings that provide a great backdrop. I love this like brass section that comes in the middle with some keys on top. Carly Bryant has a great bridge section that she sings that was really one of the highlights of the track. It's just a song that's full of magic and childhood wonder, with this really great, lush, beautiful ending, as they tend to do. It's just beautiful. And it's kind of cool. There's no epics on this album, is another kind of feature that's a little bit different than a lot of their prior albums, but they're able to infuse a lot of those epic feels and the things that they do in a shorter, compact space. This song is like 6.5 minutes long, but it feels like there's a lot going on for it, and a lot to be told in the story and in the music itself. So I don't really miss the epics, even though I love epics as a big prog nerd. I don't really feel that that's missing here. I think they kind of infuse the stuff you want to hear from epics into these other pieces. Next is Bats in the Belfry from Nick DiVirgilio, another instrumental, kind of similar to Apollo from Common Ground, but a lot shorter and breezier. But it also features kind of the brass section and a lot of feature on, of course, the drumming, kind of some drum soloing even. It's really a cool piece and really has another great groove to it, as Nick DiVirgilio brings to the table. Oak and Stone is just a totally beautiful ballad that has a great vocal from Lungden and some great supporting harmonies, just like the band does so excellently. You know, they have this great backup chorus that really brings life to the songs, some beautiful piano playing. There's almost some, like, later into the song, almost a jazzier feel with like almost a stand-up bass vibe, violin and piano playing against each other. I like this kind of vocal send-off for David Lungden. Like, I haven't really mentioned it yet in the review, but part of the specialness of this album, I think, comes from the fact that David Lungden passed away last year tragically. So this is the last album that he'll be featured on. And so there's a lot of emotion in listening to this music and knowing this is the last work that he recorded, and just to feel that emotion in his voice and to feel the power of what he's bringing forth. He gives such a great performance, but you can't help but think about that, about the fact that this is the last time you'll hear a new recording from him, and just that it's an excellent way to kind of have a final moment, you know, to really have a great performance to be sent off with, and to give your fans this memory of you in essence. So there's something beautiful about that, but also something kind of tragic and sad to know that, you know, he's not going to be continuing with the band because of this tragic passing. So, you know, there's all kinds of emotions wrapped in, which made this such an emotional experience. But I think Oak and Stone kind of is a little bit of that for me. It's like one of his last moments where you get kind of this solo performance from him, and it's really beautifully done, and I think a great tribute to him. And there's an interesting ending with these kind of choir style vocals that are haunting and some atmosphere behind it. It's really a unique section that really stood out to me. And then the final track is another really unique track from the band called Welcome to the Planet, written by Carly Bryant, newer member to the group, and starts with kind of this brass fanfare before David Lungden's vocals come in, and then Carly takes over for the vocals for a good portion of this. That's why I say Oaken Stone is kind of David's final solo performance, because this is mainly Carly's statement here, I think, with Welcome to the Planet. And it's very different than anything from Big Big Train. There's some really cool elements. David Lungden even plays some flute throughout. There's almost a Pink Floyd element through a lot of it, like this kind of atmospheric, haunting vocals and synths, and kind of this really interesting mood that's almost darker and kind of haunting, before it morphs into somehow this vaudeville New Orleans jazz kind of number where Carly does these vocalizations and gets more jazzy with her keyboard playing as it goes, and then all of a sudden you're in this kind of jazz club with horns and all of this style to kind of send off the song. It's really interesting, and so that's kind of how they've decided to end this album. So this song is kind of a good representation of like them trying new things and trying to put themselves in a new direction by utilizing their new members and bringing the talents that they bring to the band. So I thought it was really effective, and this was a perfect kind of harbinger of what you might expect if the band decides to continue, and this could be kind of something to look forward to what type of music that might come out on a future record. So really this is the perfect album to like close the chapter a little bit on the David Lungden era. It's unfortunate that we have to close the chapter in the manner that we are, but I think if he had to have a send-off, this was a perfect one, because his voice is so excellent. He's so expressive and meaningful in his singing, and it made for an emotional experience to realize that this is the last recording that he'll be on with Big Big Train, that he'll be on in life. And so it's a really tough realization. But at the same time, this really is kind of a springboard for what might happen in their future. You know, it's utilizing these new members and showing their influences and showing that they can bring new elements that are a little bit different. You know, you could argue that Big Big Train before Common Ground was getting a little bit stale. Like, they were in a very similar lane throughout their albums, and they do it expertly, but I was starting to feel like, you know, maybe they need to break out and do some new things. You know, I love what they do. I don't want them to abandon that, but let's infuse some new things to kind of freshen it up. And I think with Common Ground, and even a step further with this, they've done exactly that. You know, they've brought in some fresh new sounds that are bringing new life into the band, and their future is hopefully bright. You know, it's in question because of David Lungden and the situation with his passing, but I hope this album kind of gives some form of like a healing balm for those who have been struggling with this grief of David's passing, that you can kind of feel soothed in some ways by hearing his vocals, by hearing his contributions, and enveloping yourself in this calming, beautiful music. That's kind of how I felt as I was listening to it, at least. And hopefully having some measure of hope for a future, that this band can continue forward and do more with what they have, and continue to share their talent with the world, and continue to grow in their popularity and in what they do. Because what they've done so far has been remarkable, that they've been able to grow and develop and become one of the leading modern prog bands that exists. And I love that journey, and I do hope it continues, but I know it's a difficult one, and we'll see. We'll have to see how things develop. So that's my review of this album. I really thought it was fantastic. I really love each of these pieces. The only negative, and it's not even really anything to do with the album or the band or anything, just more me and what I did. I felt like the experience of listening to the album was marred a bit by me having listened to all the singles leading up to it, because having listened to all the singles, I pretty much knew most of the album, and so nothing really was all that new when I was listening through the album till we got towards the end of the album with Oaken Stone and Welcome to the Planet. But that's more me, and maybe I like that they give you options. You know, you don't have to listen to the singles if you want to wait for the full album. I can't really help myself, and I like to talk about them on my New Music Friday series, so I feel like I have to at least give a listen to these singles to be able to report on them and talk about them in my shows. But it was still an incredible experience to hear how they were sequenced and how they kind of flowed from one to the next. So I think it was still a valuable experience to hear it as a full album. And I can't wait to receive my copy. I'm still awaiting it. It's still coming in from Burning Shed. I'm hoping it'll be here any day. I got the red vinyl from Burning Shed, so I'm excited to actually spin the physical album, and so that'll be a lot of fun when I receive it. So basically that's all I have for you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Hopefully you guys will subscribe if you haven't yet. I do these reviews. I hope to do reviews on almost a weekly basis, but of course it's dependent on when albums come out and so forth. But I love talking new music. Really excited about this release, and hopefully you guys are too. Please enjoy whatever music you guys have going on, whether it's Big Big Train or anything else that's been exciting you lately. Thank you guys so much for your support, for your comments. Let me know how you feel about this Big Big Train album in the comments. I'd love to know. And so with that, I will leave you, and I'll see you guys in a future video. Bye.